Salutations Rangers, General Rally 101 back at you again with some more lore. And in today's video, boys and gals, we're talking about something that is super undercovered in Warhammer 40k. And to be honest, it is a goddamn shame. Not only a shame, but a crime, dare I say. And I do indeed say it is indeed a crime of the highest order. Because today, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the Traitor Guard. Specifically though, 5 underrated and rather unknown Traitor Guard regiments that are just too badass to be ignored. So, strapping in, buckle up, and let's get cracking like an on with today's video, as we talk about 5 underrated Traitor Guard regiments that you really should know about. So starting us off at number 5, we have the Tyrant's Legion. Now, in this case, whilst you may know of them, you certainly don't know about them. The Dab War is always seen as a Space Marine conflict, as is any conflict that Space Marines are involved in. I mean, it is kind of hard to not focus on them when they're literally 9 foot tall and giant and, you know, ripped as all hell and big gun and all that, so I can't really blame them too much for that. But I want to give a little bit of light and shine a good old view on these awesome, amazing Guard regiments. Because initially, they started out as Guard regiments. So, for those of you who don't know, the whole precursor to the whole Pact War thing happened because Mr. Huron was rather upset that Mr. Terra wasn't giving him that good sweet cash in terms of both monetary value as well as troops to conduct his campaigns. Basically, Badab was all the way over out in nowhere and Terra didn't really care about it that much. So long as the tide flows, the Imperium doesn't give a damn. Meaning that if Huron wanted any support, he'd have to raise it then and there. Thus, the Astral Claws, as well as the rest of the Phalanx Warders, that being the Space Marine chapters that were assigned to guard that region of space, became incredibly self-sufficient. And of course, that included all the Allied Guard regiments. But these weren't really Guard regiments per se, i.e. they weren't regiments that were trained up and equipped in the Guard fashion. They were the standard PDF from the various different planets across the system of space. But Huron took them, and he trained them to hell and back, and he contracted with the local mechanics to gain them really good quality gear, eventually transforming what was a super shoddy, shabby PDF regiment into a true, unified, proper Guard regiment, known as the Tyrant's Legion, because they were the Legion of the Tyrant of Badab, aka Huron. And to say that these guys were good is a hell of an understatement. The Tyrant's Legion were made to be the pinnacle of what normal human beings could achieve. You know, given with everything and the shortcomings of like technology and all that, but they were even a cut above regular Guard regiments. Why? Because they were trained specifically by Space Marines. Huron put in an emphasis that these were trained with Space Marine standards in mind. Not actual Space Marine standards, mind you, but Space Marine standards for human beings, which was still pretty fucking high. And like any Guard regiment trained by Astartes, a la the Ultra Auxilia, they were a cut above the rest of the standard Guard. Combine that with the fact that they were organized in direct accordance not only to Huron, but the Astral Claws. The Astral Claws were integrated into them and vice versa. Overall, you got a super organized, well-disciplined, well-drilled, and semi-elite Guard force that was assisted by Space Marines directly within them, meaning that they were just a cut above the rest. And all in all, hella effective. And you don't gotta just take my word for it. In the Badab War itself, these were the Guard regiments that fought other Space Marines, and the fact that they weren't immediately steamrolled and actually held ground for a good bit of time, hey, that says enough for myself, Chief. Also, with the whole styrings of the Tyrant of Badab, you know, with the whole Greco-Roman influences to them that kind of give them their own persona as well. And you know, it's always really cool to me to see a Guard regiment that started out not actually as a Guard regiment, but rather its own unique thing, its own human force that eventually became a Renegade regiment, then eventually transformed into Chaos. Because when the Astral Claws became the Red Corsairs, a good chunk of the Tyrant's Legion did go with them. Not all of them, mind you, but enough so that they still continued. And they still exist today in some fashion. Of course, they're not known as the Tyrant's Legion now, at least I don't think, because, you know, surprise, GW hasn't touched that with a 10-foot pole ever since its introduction, but overall, they do still exist, and they are still held to the same standards as the previous Legion, meaning that they are still effective. A little more chaotic and a little less hygienic, I can guarantee you that much, but still very effective. And when you consider the fact that they've also probably been turned into Corsairs enough themselves, because, you know, of course, why wouldn't they? Meaning that you got some pretty scary pirates going on. Yarhar and shiver me timbers, Jack Sparrow. But all in all, the Tyrant's Legion are an excellent example of just how powerful Space Marines can be, but not in a physical sense, but in a leadership role. Space Marines as administrators as well as leaders can take a basically unseemingly backwater force like the PDF, which is barely considered worth its salt, and transform them into a proper, effective fighting force. So much so that they can even hold their own against Space Marines. For a time, mind you, not exactly solo auxilia here. And the fact of the matter is that they just get overshined by the Badab War in of itself, because it's Space Marine versus Space Marine combat. That's what people are there for. And it really is a damn shame. Because yes, while the Badab War very much is a Space Marine story, the fact that you have such an amazing guard regiment that was quite literally built from the ground up with one purpose in mind, and the fact that they perform so admirably, it's a damn shame that they get overlooked always when people talk about the Badab War. I mean, Huron basically made a mini Ultramar. Think about it. The god was raised in-system, with in-system logistics, in-system recruitment, in-system armaments. If the Badab War didn't happen, or if he won, the Tyrant's Legion could have grown to be its own unique god regiment. Maybe even establishing an own mini pocket empire. It's food for thought. And the fact that you had such an element that was so pivotal to the Astral Claws, and they're just basically ignored in the story, their own story, mind you, it just feels very bad, man. It feels like a massive injustice done to such an awesome faction. But regardless of how many people may read about them in the Badab War, one cannot deny that they were goddamn effective in it. And they are a nice, good way to open up, talking about the awesome Traitor Guard regiments here. And for me, that earns them their number 5 spot really nicely. But from the Tyrants of Badab to the Legions of Mobia, let's move on to our 4th place. And 4th place, we have the Mobian Guard. Again, this is something that you may have heard of, but again, not really paid much attention to. The Mobian Guard, to my knowledge, is a unique creation for the Darktide games, specifically the Mobian 6th Regiment, the one we're going to be talking about, and the one that is the main antagonist, together with the Nurgle cult, for the Darktide games. Now, everyone here will have heard the name Mobian, but pretty much like the whole Tyrant's Legion thing, you probably don't really know much about them. And their story is very tragic in a way, but it also is one of my favorites in all of Warhammer 40k, because it goes to show the just sheer benefit of chaos, as well as the sheer negligence of the Imperium. So, the story goes as such. Mobia and the Mobian system had long produced loyal guard regiments. One of them, and the most vaunted, was the Mobian 6th, for they were deployed far away from their home front, and they fought in the conflict of the Far Fringes, aka random backwater planet beset by all types of horrors, and they were meant there to hold and defend. The Mobian 6 was a regular line infantry regiment, though it is noted they had a lot of Tempestus science as well as heavy trooper options as well as some armored elements. Not enough to be considered any type of mixed regiment, mind you, but enough that they had a good support. They were a nice solid regiment, and they performed admirably. It is noted that in every single fight and engagement that they served in, they served incredibly well, and they brought great honor and distinction to Mobia. So much so that the name the Mobian 6th was known throughout the entirety of the Mobian system and outlying systems because of just how effective they were, and the fact they hadn't died yet doing so. Double bonus. But that's the problem though. The Imperium, like many things, kind of forgot them. So war after war after war after conflict after campaign and campaign and campaign, they were never sent back home. Granted, most guard regiments aren't, mind you, but they were never sent to recover. They were never given pause, they were never given respite. They were just thrown again and again and again and again at the horrors of humanity and expected to stand and die. And to their credit, they did stand, but they didn't die. They lived. And they saw the horrors that was the true galaxy, and they saw that the Imperium had lied to them. In the Mobian system, the planet of Aurochs Prime was basically a propaganda hub, I guess you could say. I mean, with the whole everything going on in the Darktide games, that's not really a bit of a stretch for me to say, but it's noted specifically that growing up and during training, the Mobian 6 in particular, or Mobian regiments in general, don't really know, were fed copious amounts of propaganda. And they were meant to believe that the Imperium was the best of the best. It's the classic old meme of, oh, humans are stronger than orcs in melee. If you find an orc, just punch him in the face and he'll die. They believed that wholesale. The Imperial Infantryman's uplifting primer to them was their handbook to life, and it could do no wrong. Except when they ended up actually fighting orcs and realizing that the bloody thing lied to them through their teeth. It was a crude and rude and terrible awakening for the Mobian 6th. And in that moment they realized that so far the Imperium had lied to them about everything regarding their hated enemies. And if the Imperium had lied to them about literally everything, was their enemies really that hated? Combine the fact that the Imperium basically forgot about them, and didn't support them, and treated them like shit, and didn't give them anything, because whilst in Mobia they were hailed as heroes, their actual treatment was no better than any other line regiment. Poor treatment, being forgotten about, not feeling appreciated, and the fact that they were never given time off, meant that as soon as Niggle corruption came a-knockin', and you heard folks saying about, hey, Turn away from the evil Imperium. Embrace the Grandfather's love, because he, at the end of the day, does care about you. It's very easy to see why the Mobian 6 fell to Nurgle, and Chaos as a whole. Eventually, however, they would be recalled back to their home world, and maybe the Imperium had finally remembered about them, maybe the Imperium had known and taken note of their exploits and decided that hey, they deserve to get some rest. Maybe, but no, this is Warhammer 40k. It's called Grimdark for a reason. The Mobian 6 were only recalled back to their homeworld to put down a chaos insurrection by, guess what? Yep, the Cult of Acclamation, aka the Nurgle Cult. So, the Mobian 6 gathered up, went on home to Oryx Prime, and when they were there, lo and behold, instead of gunning down the terrible cultists, they gunned down the other Imperial Guard. It was there that they had showed their colors, and they had become true servants of Nurgle. For the Plague Father loves all, and the Plague Father does not forget his children, unlike the nefarious bastards of the Imperium. And from there, the Mobian 6 continue to wage a war for the soul of Oryx Prime and of itself. They seek to claim this world and liberate not only their home, but the entirety of the Mobian system, in the name of the Grandfather. And to me, it's just such a potent tale about the Imperium, because it's everything wrong with the Imperium, and it's why Chaos has such an easy time getting in. The Imperium is stupid, it's dumb, it's beyond idiotic. The sheer bloated bureaucracy of the Imperium means that regular regiments, regular people, regular planets are not noticed until they stop giving you taxes, because that's the only time the Imperium will notice. Now yes, of course, that's the meme of, oh, it's grimdark, but in the same vein, the only tangible way the Imperium is going to know that a planet isn't doing okay is when the literal ships stop coming. That's the only time the Imperium can know without a doubt that something is wrong. So you have the Mobian God, the 6th Regiment who countless times had fought and won, who stood where they should have died but carried on living instead. And in the end, they were rewarded with indifference. Less than indifference, they didn't even acknowledge their existence. So, when the Grandfather came a-knockin', it makes sense why they accepted him. Nurgle in particular is the most loving of the Chaos Gods. And I know I use loving in air quotes, but generally speaking, he does love his people. He loves his followers, he loves his demons, and he wants people to be happy. Now granted, this happiness may be in a weird chaos sense, but it's more than you're going to get from the other gods combined. So seeing the Grandfather of love and someone who cherishes his followers to a regiment who had been all but abandoned despite how good they did, it's a recipe for disaster. Or success if you're Chaos. The Imperium's greatest failure is of itself. To the Imperium of man, humanity is not a soul. It is but a resource that must be expended wisely. So when you meet Chaos, who may also think of you as a resource, but will disguise it as you having a soul and loving and caring about you, well, I know which one I would join. Combine that with the fact that the Imperium quite literally lied to the Mobian 6 about basically everything. I mean, hell, if someone lies to you about one thing, what makes you think that they aren't lying to you about another? That's how the thinking went, and to Chaos is where the Mobian went as well. Aside from them just having a really nice, cool look about them, it's very 40k-y, because you have that sci-fi feel of the flak armor and the las guns and the carapace armor, but then you also have that little bit of a Nurgle-like flair as well, which is very much common to Nurgle-themed units, but there's also little bits of Mobian flair, so it's you get to see what they were before the Nurgle-like corruption. It's still a little bit there, and it's not too bad. So all in all, I like the design, I love their lore, and overall, for a God regiment, they really just show what is wrong with the Imperium and why the Imperium always has so much goddamn rebellions. They're a great analogy, they're a great story, and they just look great overall. So all in all, to me, that earns them the 4th spot on this list. But from a regiment who was lied to at how much they were cared about, to a regiment who know damn well just how much they're cared about. Let's go into number 3. And ladies and gentlemen, at number 3 we have the Iron Guard. Now, the Iron Guard is the collective term for the Iron Warriors Auxilia. Now, when discussing about human elements in traitor forces, there are 3 different levels. You have cultists, you have guard, and then you have auxilia. Cultists are quite simple. They're raving madmen that are thrown away quite literally like spare dirt. No one gives a fuck about them, not even themselves. And they're basically used as that. Traitor Guard are something a little bit more better. They're still thrown away, relatively speaking, but it's more a case of, hey, we're gonna send out this tank regiment to take up all the anti-tank fire before the Space Marines go in. Still very much sacrificial, still not really cared much, but generally speaking, used a little less sparingly than the cultists. And then finally we have the auxiliaries. These are human units that Space Marines, both loyalists and traitor alike, have seen and are like, yeah, you guys can be used well. Now, depending on legion to legion, it could be a mixture of respect, admiration, love, or simply just, you're too useful for me to throw you away. And the Iron Guard fall into the latter category. Now, it's a collective term for all of the Iron Warriors auxiliaries, with the original auxiliaries being the Seleucid Thorakrates. As always, GW, very subtle. These were essentially a solo auxiliary cohort directly raised from Pretirabo's homeworld of Olympia, and directly attached to the Iron Warriors fleet. And they existed throughout the entirety of the heresy, and they survived even after the heresy, and entered the traitors into the Eye of Terror. Now, the original core of the Iron Guard were made up of these fellas, so trained and equipped as solo auxilia. And due to the Iron Warriors' nature and armaments, they were able to keep that way. Because remember, Solo Auxilia are one of the few regiments of humanity that the Imperium and Space Marines as a whole outright just accepted as just as good as a Space Marine, or as close to a Space Marine as you can get. They really held them in high regard. So the original Iron Guard was made up of the Thorakrates. But eventually, over the time, since Olympia was, kind of destroyed a little bit, Lamau, Purty, they would be recruited from various other different elements. Basically, whenever a human would catch an Iron Warrior's eye, they would test them. And eventually, if they passed that test without displeasing their master, they would eventually be given into the role of auxiliary. Or, close to auxiliary as we can. It's one of those things that isn't really super touched upon, it's pretty vague, but at the end of the day, we do know some concrete things. The Iron Guards still indeed do exist. As to what level the technology is, it's unknown. Logically, you'd probably think they'd be pretty close to the Auxilia because, the Iron Warriors are not the only traitor legion that still have Auxilia, but we'll touch upon those later. And the Iron Warriors are the most technologically advanced of a legion, so if any legion could do it, it'd be them. But regardless of how they're equipped, they are generally speaking elite formations of human beings which the Iron Warriors trust enough to not throw away. They are clad as heavy infantry and they are used as attritionable assets. But not as attritionable assets as the other traitors or cultists, mind you, but much more to support the main Iron Warriors' attrition. As I said, they're auxiliary to them. Now, with the Iron Warriors in particular, the Iron Guard are heavily rigid. Discipline. Unyielding, unwieldy discipline. They are arguably the most disciplined and well-maintained of all traitor forces. And they love their siege equipment. Given that their patron legion is indeed the Iron Warriors, you can imagine that there's a lot of heavy weapons, lots of heavy artillery, and a goddamn messload of infantry. In terms of the culture surrounding them, they are, generally speaking, much well taken care of than regular soldiers. They're given relatively good quarters, relatively decent rations, very good equipment, mind you, and they serve pretty well. But, don't get the wrong idea, these ain't exactly the Prosperous Spire Guard or the Salamanders here. They don't exactly get love from their superiors. So long as you do your job, your Iron Master is going to treat you right and dandy. But the minute you fuck up, well, say hello to the bolt pistol at the back of the head, plain and simple. The Iron Warriors are brutal, the Iron Warriors are ruthless, but they're not stupid. Hence why when they see a competent, good, normal human, they're going to make sure that they have enough tools and gear to be competent. But overall, the Iron Guard are a really interesting look into the Iron Warriors. And to me, it's really a shame that we'd have basically no information on them ever since the exit into the Eye of Terror. We don't even know if they still have Solo Auxilia with them. We don't know if it's been changed or if it's been mutated or anything about them. But to me, the idea of an Iron Warrior leading a squad of regular humans, just drilled to hell and back, clad in some of the best gear, not exactly fancy, not exactly unique, but goddammit is it rugged and does it do its job. That seems like a very Iron Warrior thing to me. Again, people always liken them unto the Imperial Fists, but, in my opinion, they're way more like a mirror of the Ultramarines. Not only the whole Greco-Roman thing, but more of a darker version of what Ultramar could have been if Guilliman was a bit of a prick. And it makes sense when you think about the Iron Warriors' warfare. Their warfare is attritional-based warfare. Attrition in of its name means casualties. And if you have a Space Marine doing all the little minutiae details, it's definitely going to end up in negative returns. Wasted manpower, or Space Marine power in this sense. So why not have a bunch of really awesome, really well equipped, really well trained, very disciplined men who you trust, well, trust enough rather I should say, to guard the flank, to do picket duty, to run the supply train. Trust them to do that, and leave the actual main combat fighting to the Space Marines. Have them be your auxiliaries. To me, that makes sense. And, again, like I said, I love the idea of having like a solid phalanx of Iron Warriors being supported by these Thorakrates or these lighter skirmishers. It gets my history going and I'm like, yeah, you know what, I appreciate this. I appreciate this a hell of a lot. But all in all, the Iron Guard are a very interesting example because not only are they a glimpse into crossed with the heresy, which I always love to see with Traitor Legion elements because they are supposed to be a remnant of the past, but twisted, molded, and changed. So it'd be nice to see these Traitor Guard elements that were once the elite solo auxilia become these weird machinations, now having demonic weapons and demonic engines instead. It'd be a really nice counterpart, but they still have that sheer iron discipline and just attritional, I don't care what happens attitude that they were known for during the heresy. But whether or not they do have that, all in all, the sheer idea of the Iron Guard, it's so good. And what they could be, combined of what we do know about them, to me, that certainly gives them the third place. But from a guard regiment that isn't really super loved, to a guard regiment that is definitely super loved. Let's go on to number 2. And ladies and gentlemen, at number 2, we have the Prosperoin Spire Guard, or the Prosperoin Auxilia. Both terms are interchangeable. These are very much like the Iron Guard, in that they were originally a solo auxilia cohorts. These cohorts were raised from Prospero City in of itself, that being the capital city of Tisca, and they were armed and equipped in the fashion of solo auxilia, though much more fancy solo auxilia. Indeed, so much so that it was noted by a Remembrancer that they looked less like the battle-hardened warriors of the solo auxilia, and much more like parade ground palace troops, not really suited for a fight. But this was wholly inaccurate. The Prosperoin Spire Guard, again like all Space Marine auxiliaries, with them being a solo auxilia pattern, combined with them being under the direct patronage of a Space Marine Legion, were one of the most effective non-Space Marine human forces period, and they could definitely hold their own against any and all types of other solo auxilia. And in this case, they are more like the Ultramar Auxilia than the Iron Guard, in the fact that the Thousand Sons still love these guys. The Thousand Sons made great efforts to protect the people of Tisca, and that included the Prosperoin Spire Guard. Even after the city and the plant were destroyed, these solo auxilia followed them into the Eye of Terror. Until this day, they are still there and they are still serving. Now, granted, we don't exactly know what they've been doing or if they've been mentioned, because to my knowledge, there wasn't really much mention of them when Magnus invaded real space. It could be that GW just forgot about them, which I wouldn't put past them, or that GW decided they were something that was going to stay in the shadows. I really do hope that the former is the case and not the latter, because if it's the latter's case, I'm going to be sad, because not only do you have solo auxilia, but you have magic solo auxilia. As you can imagine, any force that is patron of the Psychic Legion is going to have Psychers to them, and the Prosperoin Spire Guard was no difference, with them having a higher number than average of Psychic combatants in them. It's unknown how exactly high, but given, it was Tisca, the city of sorcerers, I think that having a Battle Psych in at least 1 in every 10 men is generally speaking a fair number. That then only further added to the sheer effectiveness of the solo auxilia cohort. Just like how having Psychics and Space Marines make them extra better, the same suffices for the solo auxilia. Combine their hard-hitting, heavy armor, quick-moving, drop-assault shock tactics with a man that can conjure living lightning or literally knit a wound back together, that's really going to help. But all in all, it's not necessarily just how effective they were, it's more so the relationship that they represent. The Thousand Sons have always been a very unique legion amongst the Chaos Boys. And despite them being one of the big four, they were one of, if not the only legion, we're not counting the Alpha Legion here, who didn't want to fall to Chaos, who actively tried to not fall to Chaos, and who still have some elements trying to recover them from being Chaos. And the Spire Guard are a perfect example of this. The Thousand Sons were never malicious, they were never evil, they were never cruel, hence why even now with most of them being Rubricae, and them being loyal to Tzeentch, they still possess their old humans who they defended, and their humans have replicated that loyalty. They still stand with their Space Marine masters, despite them being damned to hell and back by everything they once knew and loved. To them, that doesn't matter. At the end of the day, all of them are sons of Tisca, and all of them will share in Tisca's falls, as well as its triumphs. To me, it's really interesting, and not only the fact that, hey, Psychic Solo Auxilia, that's amazing, like, who wouldn't like that? It's also what they represent. They are a continuation of heresy. And as I mentioned with the Iron Guard, that's something that I love, but with the Prosperoin Spire Guard, it's something that is a little bit more tragic. These were men and women who were completely loyal. Some argue that the Thousand Sons Legion wasn't fully loyal because of Magnus and Ahriman and what the upper echelon kind of knew, but to me, if that argument is indeed your case, well, you don't really have an argument saying that the Prosperoin Spire Guard weren't completely loyal. And despite being completely loyal, they were treated as traitors, and thus they followed their masters into hell itself, where despite them being betrayed by all, they themselves still remain loyal. Combine that with their aesthetic, the lore behind it, and everything in between, these guys definitely deserve the number 2 spot in terms of just awesome Traitor Guard. But then that begs the question, what could have ever gained the first spot? And when you talk about Traitor Guard, we're not talking about Traitor Solo Auxilia. We're talking about traitor regiments that are based off the Imperial Guard, that have turned on the Imperium. But to me, that's not really a traitor regiment. That's a turncoat regiment. To me, when you talk about heretic guard, there is only truly one example of true heretic guard. The best heretic guard, and super underrated. And ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to number 1. Ladies and gentlemen, we go all the way to the Sabbat worlds, because we're talking about the Blood Pact. The Blood Pact are, in my opinion, the definition of a heretic god. Not really a traitor, because they didn't really betray anyone. Quite the contrary, they're quite loyal to their Gower. Gower being the age-old title of their great supreme leader. So, story time. Approximately 3,000 years ago, in about 37,000 M41, there was a planet by the name of Gara, and Gara was ruled by a feudal overlord, or a Gaur, essentially their king. Now, he surrounded himself by a very elite high priesthood, and these blood priests were devoted to a very specific god, as was the entirety of the world. And that god was the god of blood and brass himself. Yes, indeedy, corn himself. Butter for the corn cobs, syrup for the corn cakes, goddammit, yes. And of course, with corn being, well, corn, these priests didn't just read scripture, they also murdered. Hence, they became a military Templar. And from this, these would be the first elements of the Blood Pact. Over time, Gaur would then lead several different conquests over the neighboring worlds, and the Blood Pact would grow in both size and scope, until eventually, they would earn their name, the Blood Pact, because it is said that every single member that joins this elite bloody brotherhood must swear a blood pact by taking their palms, fingers, and forearms and covering it on the spiked jagged armor of the Ga, slashing it open and bearing it proudly. For now, everything in the past was gone. The only thing that was left was a pact sealed in blood. From there, the Blood Pact would go on and conquer pretty much a little miniature kingdom enough themselves, and eventually the Imperium would take notice. Whilst their first ever encounters occurred in 765 M41, however, it was truly on Bel-Shema Binary during the Battle of the Akhrite Peninsula that the Blood Pact truly met the Imperium, and it was one hell of a hello. A force of over 200 Blood Pact troopers, supported by 4 stock tanks and 2 Loxati brood groups. We'll talk about those in just a quick second. They plotted an ambush for an army column of over 3,000 Imperial Guard with supporting armor. They would wait in the baking, scorching heat for over 3 days without moving so much of an inch, waiting for the Imperial Guard to march up. The Guard, believing that no enemy was there, because who in their right mind would wait 3 days in the scorching sun, walked into the trap. And in one fell instance, these 200 Blood Pact as well as their supporting personnel would lay absolute waste to the 3,000 Imperial Guard, catching them completely by surprise, slaying every last one to the man, claiming their armor as well as their arms as not only bloody trophies, but tributes to the one true Gore. From there, the Blood Pact would continue fighting in the entirety of the Sabbat World's front, and they have proved much more than a match for the standard Imperial Guard, and in many cases they have proved to be far and above the standard Imperial Guard. The Blood Pact have proven without a doubt to be a truly elite Traitor Guard regiment. And this is due to 2 factors. One, they are not purely an infantry melee force. Melee combat is indeed quite noted because, well, servants of Khorne. But there is a secondary. Their primary weapons are las and autoguns, much like the Imperial Guard. In addition to this, they have a great love of artillery as well as armor, with almost every single one of their formations, including one or the other, with their most elite of elite formations being clad and armed as Tempested Scions and being fully mechanized, with their own tank regiments as well. Another reason why they're just a cut above the rest is because, unlike the majority of humans, they're not xenophobic. They're willing to work with alien races and mercenaries, the most common being the Luxotl, a semi-large breed of Xenos that is quite good in combat and often makes up for any shortcomings that the smaller, less powerful humans may have. In addition, they also have shock infantry units made up of monstrous infantry, via mutants and other chaos creatures. This ranges anything from mutated humans to ogrins to even chaos spawn. But the thing is though, they won't just throw them pale-mail into the military, no. They will actually integrate them in specialized shock units. But not only do they have a wide and varied arsenal, the main thing that really makes these guys the best Traitor Guard regiment is the fact that they are hilariously disciplined. They are the most disciplined regiment, period. So much so that despite what some Imperial officers may not like to admit, they're far more disciplined than some Imperial Guard regiments. In fact, they'd rival such regiments as the Mordian Iron Guard and Krieg in terms of their sheer just rigidity. And that's not just me saying something, that's something that people have noted in lore as well. And this is perfectly encapsulated in their very own commissariat, known as the Arrogars. Now, these fellas' whole job are basically there to execute members of the Blood Pact who have betrayed their oath to the Gaur. You see, unlike many other warbands and Traitor Guard regiments, you cannot kill a fellow Blood Pact soldier. If you do, you are therefore executed. However, the only time that an Arrogar will actually execute a Blood Pact soldier is if they actively betray the Gaur, i.e. they have second thoughts about being a heretic, or they quite literally try and mutiny. Then, straight old bolt pistol on the back of the head. Otherwise, generally speaking, they have a very, 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 very low casualty rate in terms of self-inflicted casualties. Because, unlike the Imperial Guard, generally speaking, Blood Pacts don't run away. They're nearly unbreakable. They're very much like the Krieg in that regard, because they are directly devoted to Khorne. And unlike cultists who only run on blind faith, these guys have the very, very, very strict discipline of a drill sergeant backing them up. And this is because they're a proper army. They have their own supply bases, they have their own logistics network, they have their own order structure, they have their own administration, hell, they even have their own pay network. They are quite literally the Imperial Guard, but better. They are basically a Cadian or a Krieger or a Catachan or a Mordian. They are part of the elite, but for the Traitor Guard. In fact, I've been saying Traitor Guard a lot, but that doesn't really do them justice. They're not really a Traitor Guard, even though there are plenty Traitor Guard regiments in their rank. In fact, many Guard regiments who do end up going Traitor will often try and find their way into these fellas because of how reminiscent it is. Their rank structure as well as various other things are very similar to the Imperial Guard, but as I said, just to an elite caliber. But these are not Traitor Guard. These are a Heretic Guard, because they are homegrown, wholly made, and basically more effective than most Guard regiments that the Imperium can field. They're up there with the echelons of the Kriegers, Cadians, and Catachans. And this goes to show with most of their weapons. Generally speaking, they are a primarily heavy infantry formation, again with a panache of being a hybrid infantry. They're able to throw down volleys of last fire, but also have a panache for close quarters infantry. But as I mentioned, they make great use of mutants, chaos creatures, mutated ogrins, regular ogrins, as well as the Loxato, that being alien mercenaries, as shock troopers. And as I mentioned, they have their elite formations, known as the Death Brigades. The Death Brigades are elite mechanized formations of stormtroopers, or the stormtrooper equivalent, mind you. And they are used in either decapitating strikes or first-line spearhead punches. As I said, hella elite. And they also make use of mages, psychers specifically. These are known as Gore Mages, but hold on, Khorne doesn't like psychers. Well, when they use regular magical spells, yeah, but when they use it to literally transform into giant mutated werewolves, Khorne approves. And that's what these boys do. No psychic nonsense for them, only ripping and tearing with claws and teeth, baby. Now, whilst you may be thinking, okay, so these guys are basically just regular Guard, not really. They have a very, very, very unique chaos flair to them. For example, they're armed in usually either carapace or flak armor, but also plate and chainmail, in combination with the flak, because they like getting up close and personal, and those unique items protect better against melee than regular flak armor. Also, their armor is very, very spiky, because chaos. And their most iconic piece of kit is what is known as a grotesque, a ritual iron visor. As depicted here, it's shown them in a sort of leering glare, like old demons from ancient Earth. And whilst the standard one has an iron, it's known that officers can have anywhere from bronze, silver, all the way up to gold, going from low, medium, and to high rank. In addition, their cloth is dyed red, specifically blood red, by actual blood. A very unknown but very important aspect of the Blood Pact, they do psychological warfare, but kinda by accident. With the whole grotesque face thing and also them literally being dipped in dried blood, they stink like high hell. Not to mention with the various unguents and oils that they added are of the demonic variety, from the batshit crazy Doc Mechanicum, meaning that they stink even more like high hell. But their most iconic feature has to be the fact that they don't use any lower arm armor. From the elbow down, they are completely bare, because they are there to show their ritual scars that they were made at the first time of their introduction into the Pact, where they swore allegiance to their King Gore as well as the god Khorne. All in all, the Blood Pact are just the perfect example of a heretic god regiment. And as I said, they're not a Traitor Guard regiment, they are a heretic god regiment. And in my opinion, when you think of evil god, this is this. Not some ragged mob of cultists on a random bullshit uprising world. No. A proper, professional military. with a chaos flair. And I gotta admit, these things are awesome. I fucking love these guys, bro. Look at them, they're so sick. And they're not exactly small anyway. It's estimated that at current time, these boys are at least 1 million strong, and growing. With the whole upheaval of chaos, some people estimate that they've doubled if not tripled in size. And when you consider everything that's going on, they definitely have increased. But overall, the Blood Pact are without a doubt the pinnacle of what traitor or evil god should be. In my opinion, they do so much that they have graduated from the rank of regular traitor god, and they've become a heretic god. Part of the elite. As one of my colleagues Voldemort put it, they are Corn's Creek, and they certainly earned that title. Also, they have their own regiment of super heavy Baneblade tanks. What's not to love about these guys? They're literally the god, but better. Also chaotic. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so very much for watching. Let me know down below. What do you guys think about the Traitor God? Which one of these is your favorite? Did I miss one of your favorites? And do you guys agree with me that the Blood Pact are so unique that they have elevated and graduated from Traitor God to actually proper Heretic God? I know you could make an argument for the Iron God as well as the Prosper Inspire God as well, but for me, these are just like, when you say Heretic God, Blood Pact, that's what you go for. But let me know down below, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but I want to say a massive thank you to you guys for watching, and even more massive thank you to my awesome members and Patreons. And massive shout out to my Officer Corps, my Lieutenant Tiers. Shout out Mr. Eddie V3 and Miss Major of the Void. Big shout out to all my Sergeant Tier fellas. Mr. Damiak, Mr. Andy McGee, Mr. Warsmith the Fireheart, Mr. Codes Butcher, and Mr. Sean IRL7. Shout out to my corporate tier members, Mr. Bowen and Tremail the Mouth Kitty. And finally, but certainly not least, big shout out to my private tier members, Mr. Thomas Moslons, Mr. Ivan _SBW, Mr. Michael Hayeda, Mr. Hattori's Curse, and of course, Mr. Monkey Man. And very big shout out to my Patreon members, Mr. Fortus Unum, General Alexander, and Mr. Bulwin. Thank you, each and every one of you, sincerely from the bottom of my heart. It means the absolute world that you guys put this faith in me and you guys support me like this, which means I can do this content more and more and more. So if you want to join these awesome guys and gals, sign up with either the memberships or the patrons. Get a bunch of early access to some stuff, behind the scenes stuff, whatever goes on in making the channel, y'all get a hand in it. And if there's any brand new things, y'all get first access and first dibs, as well as getting involved in some various unique items that we're having on, because we got a lot of stuff coming this year. So join up and you'll get the first to know it. But remember, it's always be free, and I will love you whether you give me $1 or not. Mwah! Yes, I will. But ladies and gentlemen, I've been the General Brother 101. You've been beautiful, awesome, and amazing people. Thank you all so very much for watching. Or should I say loyal there, boys and gals. And I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss, Rangers. Could you imagine the smell at the Blood Pact's barracks? Jesus Christ.